Okay, so good morning. We are continuing our path through Nedarim as we come to the conclusion. We are, today's daf is Pei Zion. We are on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Bet, the last line, as we yesterday learned the Gemara, and today pick up with the, yesterday learned the Mishnah, and today we pick up with the Gemara. And the Mishnah that we learned at the end of the day yesterday addresses what happens if a husband or father is mistaken in his understanding of the nature of the neder that he revokes. And we saw three categories of mistakes that he could make, which would each require his engaging in a new revocation. So the first is if he mistakenly thought it was his daughter who made the neder when it was his wife, or his wife who made the neder when it was his daughter. Or he thought the neder was about a sacrifice when in fact it was about nazirut, or vice versa. Or he thought the neder was about figs when it was about grapes, or he thought it was about grapes when it was about figs. So again, in each of these three situations, he needs to revoke the vow a second time. So the Gemara is going to begin by considering a similar kind of mistake, where somebody makes a mistake when tearing kriya upon the hearing about the death of a close relative, and it seems initially that there's a contradiction, and so we will try to resolve the contradiction, and we will find, we'll offer two answers, and in this particular instance, the two answers are in some ways complementary, and some people even say that actually both answers are in fact true. So let's take a look. So we pick up with the Gemara on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Bet, as we say, L'meimra diyani ota davkahu. That seems to indicate that when the Torah says in Bamidbar Perek Lamed Pasuk that he specifically retrains her ota, that is dafka. We saw this question several times already throughout Maseches Nedarim when evaluating the psukim, that we said, should the verses be interpreted literally? In other words, should the restrictions in the verse be absolute requirements? So for example, we talked about whether hearing is a requirement, and we in the end concluded yes, that there is an element of hearing that must exist. So as a result, a deaf husband will lack the ability to be mefer the nedarim of his wife because he cannot hear them, and there's no yom shama'o. So it's not so it's meant to be literal as opposed to figurative. And so here too, when it says her, it means that he needs to have in mind who it is that he's talking about. As the Ron helps us out here. Take a look at the, let's finish the question and then we'll come back to the Ron. So that's the situation here, right? Here it seems that Yaniota is understood literally, V'hagabi Karaim, but when it comes to tearing Kriya, Diksiv al, it is in Navi, in Shmuel Bet, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yud Aleph and Yud Bet. So it says Diksiv al Shaul v'al Yonatan beno, that when it talks about the tearing of garments, it references the Al Shaul and Al Yonatan and Perek Yud Bet. It says that it was Tor Kriya over each of them. It says over Shaul and over Yehonatan. So doesn't that seem to indicate that you need to have intention on each one individually? Vitanya, and yet we have a brisa. Amrulo Mesav. If somebody hears that unfortunately their father has passed away, Vikara, and he tears his garment, and then it turns out that it actually was his son who passed away, Yatsa Yadei Kriya, he has in fact fulfilled his obligation to tear Kriya. So on the one hand, we have specific language in the Torah, and we say that specific language makes a difference, and therefore if you have the wrong intention, you have to do it over again. But when it comes to tearing Kriya, where we have specific language in the Navi, and we say that you don't have to do it over again. So how do we resolve it? So we're going to again resolve it in two different ways, but before we do so, let's go through the Ran here because I think it has some interesting information for us. So Lememra de Yaniota. So we'll take a look at the last Ran. It's the first Ran on the Gemara. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines up in the widest lines at the bottom of Tevav Amabet. The Kevan Diksiv Ota, because the Torah wrote Ota her, Mashma Shiafir L'Shem Ota Shinadra. You have to have in mind the particular Ota, the particular woman who made the neder. V'lo yishita isha acheret. And you can't make a mistake and think that it was some other wife. The Kashali. Now, at the same time, the Ran now asks a question. Kevan de Ota Mapikla Tenech V'Hafara. Well, that reference to Ota talks about Yani Ota. That's to restrain her, that meaning that you prevent her vow from taking place. So that pasuk is referring specifically to Hafara, Diksiv Ota, because that's where the word Ota was written. But Aval Hakama Minalan. How do we know that the same rule applies to somebody who's trying to confirm a vow? Hi de Kasivna b'masnisin v'isa b'tosefta, and we have an indication in the Mishnah and in the Tosefta that in fact this is true. That in fact you have to have the right intention with respect to confirmation as well. That if you confirm the vow thinking that it was your wife when it was your daughter, or your daughter when it was your wife, you have not in fact confirmed the vow. And if you want to say because we're going to make this connection between of confirmation and revocation, where we say that we saw in the last parak, Amru lo isha yikimenu isha yifirenu, that there's this idea of her husband can confirm it, her husband can revoke it. So that reference to the two right next to each other suggests some connection between them. Et sheba l'klal hakem ba l'klal hafer, that whatever comes up in connection with confirming the vow would also come up with connection with revoking. With revoking the vow. So that maybe we could use that as a basis, and because we know that you need to have the right Ota with respect to Hafara, we can learn that you need the right Ota with respect to Hakama. So Rabbi Akiva Nami Lakam and Makish Hafara Lakama. Indeed, we'll see in a moment that Rabbi Akiva is about to connect revocation and confirmation. So Ma Hakama Mimenu, Hafara Mimenu. Indeed, Rabbi Akiva is about to say that just because that since we that we allow Hakama of a partial vow, we should allow Hafara of a partial vow. The Kavan de Island, Hafara de Ota, Dafka, Kiman Diksiv, Hakama Dami. So let's just say that because we have the word Ota in connection with Hafara, we'll say that Hakama is just like it. But that the Ran now rejects that. Lo nichali, that doesn't make sense to me. Dafilu laman did makish. Because everybody agrees that not every rule with respect to Hafara applies to Hakama and vice versa. It's only from the things that are in those relevant verses. We don't try to learn every rule of Gufay from those specific verses. It's only from that verse in particular. Because in fact we said earlier, that we said that there are chumrot when it comes to Hakama as opposed to Hafara, that there are certain additional rules or additional limitations that apply to confirmation that don't apply to revocation. Kiyam bilibo kiyam hafar bilibo eno mufar. We saw that when you have in your heart to confirm, that is sufficient, meaning you don't actually need to use any words. Whereas when you try to revoke in your heart, then you have not done a revocation. And if in fact we're supposed to connect every aspect to it, why isn't it true here? Elavadai afilu laman demakish lo itkish ela b'mili dehahukra gufei. So the general principle, this is an important Ron in this Masechet, that we apply this rule everywhere. We don't apply just because it says it by one, we apply it to the other. Delav hekeshahu. It's not a true hekesh. It's not a true connection. Ella smichusa. It's ba'alma. It's just an adjacency that we're going to use the ishaya kimena, the ishaya fimenu. It's just that adjacency. The kevan shekain, and therefore tenach b'hafara diksiv ota hakama minalan. So he's re-raised his question. All right, we can understand why hafara needs to have the right intention. Why does hakama? The efshar deluxive diksiv b'hakama. That in fact, the word says la when it comes to making la. I'm now not remembering the exact phraseology in the words, but the pasuk which is in Bamidbar Perek Lamed pasuk Chet specifically refers to her. With the word la. So here it is. That in fact he will, when he's quiet for her. So ka'osa dummy umash badafka. So when he's quiet, that's a confirmation, and so that implies that he's got to be specifically intending to be quiet for her. And therefore, I think that this is in fact the halacha to kiheka the pshita le'el the bal enu mefer l'shtei nashav, just as a husband cannot use one statement of confirmation of revocation to revoke the vows of two different wives at one time. The osa dafka, because we have the word ota and indicating that you need specificity. So hachinami enu mekayim l'shtei nashav ka'achas. You would not be able to confirm two wives at one time. De la dafka. That similarly, just as we have ota dafka, we have la dafka ukamosha kasavti lamala. And as I wrote earlier, so the basic principle is that we see this rule that we're applying, that it also applies to confirmation. So that's just an important understanding of the rule. But now backing up, and what's the question? So again, the question is why is it when it comes to Nedarim, we say that Ota is specific, but when it comes to Kriya, we don't say that Kriya is specific. So how do we answer this question? So we dive back into the Gemara, fourth line down, second word on the line. Amri, they said, Lo Kasha, not a problem. We can resolve this apparent contradiction. Habistam, when we're talking about when somebody has been told just we'll translate it very literally without interpreting it like any mefarish, any commentary, any parish, because there are going to be two different ways to understand it. So habistam, when there's no specificity, so then there's going to be no requirement to do things over. V'ha b'mefarish, but our Mishnah is talking about specificity. So the person, and so what do we mean by that? So let's take a look first in the Ran. Does somebody have a question? Okay, so first let's take a look in the Ran, and then we'll take a look in the Mefarish and Tosfos. So, and you know what? Let's just back up for a moment and say help. The Ran has a nice phraseology in connection with the question. So we'll start with the top Ran. That Vahad Gabi Kurayim Diksiv Al Shaul and Al Yonatan. So the Havilan Lamemer, we should say Al, that the word Al Dafka is also specific. Shikra L'Shem Hamet, that you need to care kriya for the particular person who died. Below Shiyitz Abba Acher, and that you can't make a mistake about thinking that that somebody else had died. But Filu Hachi, and nonetheless, Tana, we have a Tana that says Amran lo Meis Aviv B'Kara V'Acher Kach Nimsa B'No. That if the person was told that his father died, and then to our kriya, and then it turns out that it was his son, Yatsa Yadei Kriya. So he actually fulfilled his obligation to tear kriya. Alma Al, the word al is lav dafka. So hachinami lema ota lav dafka. So once we're saying al lav dafka, we could say ota is also lav dafka. So lo kasha habistam habamafarish. So hadetanya. So the continuing on the Ran. So hadetanya now in the first of the narrow lines. Hadetanya amru lo mate aviv vikara yatsa. That when we said that when the Tana said that if somebody was told that his father passed away and he tore kriya, he fulfills his obligation even if it turns out to be his son. Lav dafka bisha amru lo beferish meis aviv. We're not talking about where he was specifically told that his father died. Ela bisha amru lo meis. He was told specifically, or here it suggests in the little Zion here says Myri Mace, that we're talking about. I'm sorry, Stam. Amrulo Stam Mace, that he specifically was just told that he, without any identification, that he was told that somebody died. The Savar Aviv, and he thought it was his father. The Nimsa Beno, but then it turned out to be his son. Beha Yatsa Yadei Kriya. In that situation, his tearing Kriya will be sufficient. Aval b'mefarish. If in fact he was told who it was, Sha'amru lo meis aviv, where he was specifically told that his father had passed away, Vikara, and then he tore Kriya al daskein, based on that knowledge, lo yatsa de al dafka, because al is dafka also. So basically we end up saying both al is dafka and ota is dafka. Amru lo meis aviv lav dafka. And when we say that when the Tana said that he was told that his father passed away, that wasn't a specific language, meaning he was informed of his father's death by being told that somebody had died, and he just assumed that it was his father, but not that he was specifically told that his father had passed away. And so that is answer number one. And Behatanya, and we actually have a brisa that specifically says this. Amru lo meis aviv, if in fact his father told him he had died. I'm sorry, if they in fact told the person that the father had died. So Vikara, and then he tore Kriya, V'akarkak nimsa beno. So, and then it turns out that it was his son. Lo yatsa yadei Kriya. So we have a brisa that says the exact opposite. So Amru lo meis. But if in fact he was told just that somebody had died, and he thought it was his father, Vikara, and he taught Kriya, and then it turns out that it was his son, Kriya, then he fulfills his obligation to tear Kriya. So that is all according to the Ran. Now the Mefarish has a slightly different understanding, that rather than focusing on what is being told to him, if we take a look in what's referred to as Rashi here on the page, so the first of the narrow lines at the end of the line, kan bestam kan b'mfarsh, gabi kriya. We're referring to the thought that the person has in mind when he tears kriya. Shikara stam, he tore kriya without specific intention. Shelo alaviv, velo albano. He didn't have specific intention, neither for the father, neither for the son. Aval b'masnisin. But in our Mishnah, kagon shahafar b'ferish l'shem bito, we're talking about where he specifically had in mind his daughter, v'hilkach. Once he finds out that it's not his daughter who made the vow, he's going to have to redo it again. And the Tosos says the same thing in the third line of the Tosos. Kriya dekara stam lemishahu. Right? When it says that he teared kriya stam, it means to anybody. He was just tearing for whatever is necessary. He specifically had in mind, he says, his wife, and or my wife. And so as a result, that's the situation. So there's there's essentially a debate here between the Ran on the one hand and Tosos and Rashi and the Mefarish on the other hand, that as to what is meant by stam, with the Ran saying it's referring to what is being told to the person who's tearing kriya, whereas the Mefarish and Tosos say that no, it's about the intention of the person who's tearing kriya. In any event, that is answer number one. And now we are ready for answer number two.
Why would somebody do Kriya if they don't know who they're doing it for?
What? Well, because the purpose of tearing kriya is to effectuate the great sorrow that's associated with it.
They don't
So,
know what they're sorry for.
well, they think they know who they're sorry for.
In a
They just
Stom
say
case, they
what?
just not in a Stom case. They just said somebody. You have to do Kriya. Somebody died.
Yes, so the situation could be, if somebody has a sick relative, and indeed this happened in a case where actually the person was told that their sister passed away, and then they thought it was one sister, and it turned out to have been another sister. Now it's not likely to happen today in our current times, but that in olden times that could happen, and
Right.
so as a result. And in that situation, he actually fully sat Shiva before he was told which that it was a different sister, because one sister was sick and the other sister and another sister was not, and the sister who was not sick and therefore it was an unanticipated death. So he had assumed that it was the anticipated death. And so as a result, one can imagine in this situation where one is told that unfortunately a relative passed away, and there's confusion exactly as to who it is. But the assumption is that it's the older relative rather than the younger relative. And so as a result, that's, the person, thinks that they know, when even the Stam case doesn't mean that he has no idea. He thinks he knows who it is. He just turns out to be wrong. So that's an important clarification, that we're not saying that he has no idea for whom he thinks he knows who it is. And that's the reason that he's tearing kriya, because he actually feels a sense of regret and sorrow about the situation. It just turns out that he made a mistake. And so in that situation, because on some level there was, either you can say that there was some doubt in his mind, or the fact that he didn't actually hear. And so as a result, even though he may have had some intention, it was the intention was not a full intention. So as a result, that is why he can be Yotze Yedei Kriya, or even in our Hafara case, he could potentially be a Mayfair, the Neder, because even though he thinks it's one person, it turns out that he was not told, and so as a result, it could actually still go on another person. But that's only answer number one. And so now we're ready for answer number two. And so here we go. So the Gemara picks up with Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi says, I can give you another answer. One is a situation where it was corrected immediately, meaning that within Tokade Dibor of hearing that it was the father, and then tearing kriya, within the moments that it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Umori, or potentially just Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. So then that the person tore kriya, the person was told that in fact it was the other one. And so given the fact that things happened in such a close proximity, we will say that it's as if they that we can reverse the course and say that the person actually knew at the time. And kan la'achar kedei dibor, whereas in our Mishnah, when he learns the truth, he didn't learn it until after the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. So hag de ka'amrat Yatsa Yadei Kriya, and now we spell it out, that when we say that he fulfilled the Kriya, Shenimsa Beno B'Tokadei Dibor, he finds out that it was his son within Tokadei Dibor of having torn Kriya. Hada Amrat Lo Yatsa Yadei Kriya, and that where he found out it was not. So La'achar Kadei Dibor, that is after the amount of time. So, and we have a brisa that supports it. Although Vahatanya is often used as a question, we've seen that the language in Nedarim is a little different. Vahatanya, indeed, we have a brisa that teaches that exact point. If somebody's got somebody who's not well in their house, v'nis aleph and he passes out and seems to have died. V'kara, and now the person tears kriya. V'agar kach meis, and then after that the person actually dies. Lo yatsa yadei kriya, the person has not fulfilled the obligation to tear kriya. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Mishum Bar Kapara, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says in the name of Bar Kapara. This is what Rabbi Shimon says: Lo shanu ela shemetz la'achar kadei dibur. That in that situation, we're only talking about where the death happens sometime after the person tore kriya. But if it happened about beto kadei dibur, kedibur dami. But if it happens within that amount of time, it's as if it happened at that time, and so as a result, we can assume that that would be valid. The hilchasa, and now here's the important halacha: to kadei dibur kedibur dami. Chutz, that in general we will say that if you make a correction within to kadei dibur, that will be sufficient. Chutz mimigadev, except for if you blaspheme Hashem's name, v'over avodas kochavim, or you worship idols, umakadesh, or you get married, umagarish, or you get divorced. In those four instances, it does not work. So let's take a look at the Ran. The Ran has an interesting approach here. V'hilchasa to kadei dibur dami bar megadev v'ovid vodas kochavim umakadesh umagarish. So this is the second of the widest lines on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph near the bottom. So Perek Yesh Noklin. Well, 1 second. In Perek Yesh Noklin, which is in Bava Basra, at the end of Bava Basra. So lo chashiv elatrei. We only gave two things. We said the same rule, that the halacha of to kadei dibur kedibur dami, but we said that there are two exceptions: bar me'avodas kochavim v'kedushin. That the exceptions are idol worship and marriage. The lo pligi, but in fact these two gemaras do not argue. The megadif beklal ovodas oved avodas kochavim, that blaspheming it can be subsumed within the category of avodah zara, and umagarish beklal makadesh, and the category of divorce can be included in marriage. Because we have a general connection between divorce and going out from a marriage to havaya, to bringing into a marriage. So megadif, and what is megadif? Hainu she'im gidef. So the point of Megadev is that is, God forbid, somebody curses Hashem's name and then immediately says, no, I didn't mean that. So lo havya chazara, that doesn't undo anything, and the person is in fact punished. V'oved avodas kochavim she'im amar la'avodas kochavim eli, that if you were to say about an avodas kochavim that it is your God, so Eliata, that you are my God, right? So that it's to the avodah zara, and then you say, no, you're not my God. So lo havya chazara, that's not going to be chazara either. Umakadesh umagarish she'im kidesh o girish v'chazar bo to kadei dibur lo matzi hadar bag. And similarly, when it comes to marriage, to the first step of marriage, kedushin or gerushin, the step of or divorce. So then you say that you're divorcing the person and you've gone through the process, and then you immediately try to undo it. Then you have not undone anything. V'lo yadana ma'ishna hani u'manalahu l'rabanan hachi. Why is it that the rabbis counted these four items as exceptions? Meaning, why don't we, if we believe that that tokadei dibur kedibur dami, why shouldn't it apply even in these situations? So now the Ran is going to give his own explanations, then he's going to say what the Ramban says, and reject that. So v'nira be'ena, it seems to me, according to the Ran, to bishar mili de lo chamiri kule hai, that other kinds of speech are not so significant. I'll translate chamire in this instance. They're not. You're not going to have such intention associated with it. Kisha Adam Osa Otam, as one does these other four things. So lo b'gemar daitohu. So in other situations, you may not have thought the thing fully through. Osa. I'm sorry, the lo b'gemar daitohu osa. He may have done it without fully thinking it through. Ella daito sheyachol lachzerbo. So as a result, he has the ability to revoke it. Tokadei dibur, if he does so within the short amount of time. Abalhani. But these four items, Kaven Dechamiri Kulehai, because they have such significance, Ain Adam Osa Otam, Ella Bahaskama Gemura. That you're only going to do them if you've thought about it and really have concluded it. And so as a result, in those situations, Chazara is not going to work. Moshe ben Nachman, that I saw the Ramban says the following, Zal, the Paragesh Nochlin, Shekasa B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam Zal, that he says, the Rabbeinu Tam says the following, Tokade Dibur Kedibur Dami, Takantahu Detikun Rabbanan. So whereas the Ran has explained this as basically a biblical concept of showing the sufficient intention, the Rabbeinu Tam says that no, it's not about sufficient intention. It's a specific exception that the rabbi set up. Mishum de Talmud halokeach mekach upagabo rabo, because we're worried that if a Talmud, a student, is in the middle of doing a deal, and now his Rebbe comes and greets him, and he needs to respond to the Rebbe, sheyochol liton lo shalom. We need to enable him to say something to the Rebbe. V'hashvu midoseyen b'chol mili. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. So we need him to be able to say shalom. And so as a result, if we don't give a space of saying shalom aleichem, shalom alecha Rebbe, well then he will not be able to revoke anything that he did, meaning if you in fact have to say that it has to be immediate and there can't be any time between the two, because people say things mistakenly. They say yes when they mean no, or right when they mean left, and that can happen, but you usually immediately check it out. But a student who has an obligation to greet his Rebbe will not be able to do that immediate revocation because he needs to greet the Rebbe. And so the students of Torah will lose out versus other people, because they won't be able to correct a mistake if all of a sudden their Rebbe comes to greet them. So as a result, the Rabbeinu Tam says that they've made this exception in connection with Mekach u'Memkar, in connection with business, and so as a result, the rabbi said it would also apply to all other cases, bar mahani, with the exception of these four. However, the Ran says, "V'lo nichli." This doesn't make any sense to me, because v'chi beistin masnin la'akor davar min Torah la'olam b'kum asay b'nedarim. Are the rabbis going to really undo all, a significant piece of Nedarim as a result of this a principle that is specifically in connection with sales? So elavadai kida amram. Rather, it's got to be the way I said, that basically the main point is that from the Ran's perspective, it is all about, have you had sufficient intention? Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah now deals with partial revocation. So let's take a look. So Amra konam to Einim Anavim. If the wife says that she's prohibiting figs and grapes, Elu Sha'ani Toemis, these specific figs and grapes that I'm going to eat, that are available to me. So Kiyim Litza'inim, if the husband confirms the vow with respect to the figs, Kulo Kayam, the entire thing is fulfilled. However, if he revokes it with respect to figs, well, then it is not necessarily revoked until he revokes it for the grapes as well. Amra konam te'ena sha'ani to'emes, va'anava sha'ani to'emes. Hare elu shnei nedarim. However, if she references the tasting twice, well, then that constitutes two different vows. So let's run through these three cases and see how the Ran deals with them. So Amra konam te'enim v'anavim. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up, beginning of the Mishnah in the Ran. Amra konam te'enim v'anavim elush ani toemes kiyem te'enim kulo kiyem. That afilu la'anavim, that if you say that the figs are confirmed, well, then even the grapes will be confirmed. And so as a result, you can't undo the vow. On the other hand, it aino mofer ad sheyafer afla anavim. Well, now the Ran offers two possibilities. Either aino ofer la anavim ad sheyafer lahem beferish, meaning avala te'enim shehafer mupar. Maybe you could understand that in fact, since you've revoked the figs are revoked, but until you revoke the grapes will not be revoked. Lashon achar eino mofer klal. Or alternatively, we can understand that in fact you haven't revoked anything. Afilu l'te'enim, even the te'enim, shelo kol hemenu lahafer mitzvah, because you don't have the ability to revoke part of the vow. You either have to revoke the whole thing, or none of it gets revoked. So those are two different approaches to that case. Finally, Amra konam te'ena sha'ani to'emes va'anava sha'ani to'emes harei elu shnei nedarim. And when we say that it's shnei nedarim, that it's two separate nedarim, so the Ran explains, lav l'meimer she'yehei tzarech hafar l'kol echad ve'echad. This does not mean that you need to revoke each neder individually, b'fnei atzmo, on its own. Dehash shnei nedarim hafara achas lahen. You can revoke two nedarim at once. Kedatanya b'tosefta, as we have it in a tosefta. Hayu aleha chamisha nedarim hafara achas lekulan. You can, even though a person has made 5, the wife has made 5 nedarim, you can revoke all 5 at once. Elalomar she'im hafer okiyim echad mehem. But what this is telling us is if you do the revocation or the confirmation for one of them, you can change your mind with respect to the others. Yachol l'kayim o lahafar es hasheni. You can choose whether to confirm or revoke the other aspects of that neder. So now the Gemara picks up and wants to identify who is our Mishnah like. So Mani Masnisin, Rabbi Yishmael. So our Mishnah is actually like Rabbi Yishmael. And in fact, there are multiple possibilities as to who it could be, because we've got a brisa with a machlokas. The Tanya Ishaya Kimenu Ishaya Firenu. The husband can confirm and the husband can revoke. So Amra Konam Te'enim v'anavim elu sha'ani to'emes. So the brisa continues. So if the wife says that I'm prohibiting the tasting of these figs and these grapes, so kiyam l'te'enim, if you confirm for the grapes, confirm for the figs, so kulo kayam, the whole thing is confirmed. Hafert l'te'enim. On the other hand, if you revoke for the figs, eino mufar ad sheyafer afla navim. It's not revoked until you revoke for the grapes as well. Divri Rabbi Yishmael. So that's Rabbi Yishmael, and of course that's exactly what our Mishnah said. Rabbi Akiva says something different. Harehu Omer Ishaya Kimenu v'Ishaya Ferenu. Since we have this connection between the husband confirming and the husband revoking, Maya Kimenu Mi Menu. So the point is that we're learning almost like a play on words, that what does Yikimenu mean? And this is the basis of what Rabbi Yishmael says as well, that when we say Yikimenu, it means Yakim Mimenu, that you should confirm that from it, meaning that even a partial confirmation will end up confirming the whole thing. So Afyafirenu Mimenu, so too we should allow a revocation of part of it to also affect the entire neder. So the Rabbi Yishmael, but in fact, Rabbi Yishmael, so why doesn't Rabbi Yishmael agree to this? Rabbi Yishmael would say, Miksiv Yafer Mimenu. It doesn't say Yafer Mimenu. It says Yifirenu. That doesn't have the play on the mem of Yikimenu, of Yakim Mimenu. So as a result, that's why Rabbi Yishmael says it doesn't work for both directions. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, we're connecting revocation and confirmation. Mahakama mimenu, apafara mimenu. That since we have one, we'll have the other. And this is, as the Ran noted earlier, that we have this connection. It's not a complete connection. We only learn things that are relevant to that pasuk. And so here in this pasuk, we are saying yakim mimenu. So too, we'll say yafir mimenu as well. That's according to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yishmael says we're not even going to do that because we're just going to focus on the individual word. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zo Devri Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. Not only do we have Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva as two opinions, but we've got a third opinion. That in fact we do make the connection of confirmation to revocation, but we do it in the other direction. That when it comes to a partial hakama and a partial revocation, only that piece that has been revoked or only that piece that has been confirmed is confirmed, not the entire thing. Okay, so that is the explanation, and so we end up with three different viewpoints. And now we cite the last piece of the Mishnah, Amra Konam Te'ena. We say that if you say my tasting of the fig, my tasting of the grape, so you reference the two tastings using separate language, not a general language of one vow for everything. So in that situation, we're going to treat it as two Nedarim. And Amar Rava, Masnis and Rabbi Shimon, our Mishnah must be like Rabbi Shimon because we have a case. This is dealt with in Shavuos, I believe, that the situation is if somebody alleges that the holder of a deposit has failed to return the deposit, and the depositors want their money back, and the person who's holding the deposit says, "No, I don't have anything that belongs to you," and he's required to swear to that effect. And if he makes one shvua for all of his depositors, and he says, "I don't have anything that belongs to you, or to you, or to you," well, then he's only violated one shvua. He's only violated one oath. But Yomar Shvua Lakol Echad B'Echad. So if he in fact says that he's violating, that he's swearing to you and to you, and that he's swearing to you and he's swearing to you and he's swearing to you, if he uses that language over and over again, so then that is an indication that each Shvua has its own independence, and so as a result, every shvua that he makes, if all of them are false, he would be punished for each and every one. And so that is very similar to our case here, where if the reference to tasting is the language of shvua that we have here, it's the language of neder, and so as a result, if the reference to each one is made independently, so then we've got each one as a separate obligation, and so as a result, each one is a separate neder, and they can be confirmed or revoked on an independent basis. So okay, so now let's take a quick look at the Mishnah, and with that we'll conclude. So the Gemara, okay, so one second, I did that last piece. And so now the next Mishnah details what happens if the husband doesn't or father doesn't know about his right to revoke the vows of his wife or his daughter. So if the father says, Yodea ani sheyesh nedarim, I know about the concept of nedarim, aval eini yodea sheyesh mefirin, but I don't know anything about this idea that I'm allowed to revoke it. So Yafer, he's allowed to revoke it. And we take a look into the Ran. It's third line. It's the second 2 lines down from where it says Mishnah in the Ran on Pei Zayin Amabet. Yafer la'achar mikan, even though he has not revoked it, he didn't revoke it on the day that he heard about it. Kishinoda Lo shahabal yachol hafer, when he becomes knowledgeable of the fact that he can do this hafara, yafer toked oto yom, he can revoke it on that day. Shiodea lo da'ad hahu yoma, until that day, lo karina be yom shamo, that we're not going to call that day the day of his hearing because he didn't know that he had even the power to revoke. So in order to have a day of hearing, you have to have knowledge of the possibility of revocation. On the other hand, Yodea ani sheyesh mefirin, if the person knew that there was the possibility of revoking vows, aval eini yodea shezen neder, but he didn't realize that what his wife or daughter said is in fact a neder that could be revoked. So Rabbi Meir Omer lo yafer, Rabbi Meir says it's too late, you can't do anything about it. The Chachamim Omrim yafer. So So let's take a look in the Ran, down a few lines from where we were. So Rabbi Meir, and this is now 3, 6, 7th line up in the medium wide lines of the Ran. Rabbi Meir Omer Lo Yafer, he can't revoke it. So Ika Manda Amar. So there are two viewpoints on this machlokes, and you can see the two approaches on the screen in the matrix that I've created. So Ika Manda Amar, there's one opinion that says do Lo Yafer Klal. When Rabbi Meir says you can't do hafara, it means you can't do it at all. Kamar Lo Hayom, not on the day that he hears about it. V'lo achar shehodiyuhu shehu yachol lahafer hayom, and not after he hears that he could revoke it, that this is in fact a vow that he could revoke. To lo mikri yom shamo, that neither day is considered the day that he hears sheyehei mafer, that he should be able to revoke it. Elaka shehu yodeya shehu yachol lahafer, since he knows that he has the ability to revoke. Ul achar shehodiyuhu shehu yachol lahafer nami lo yafer, and he hasn't actually revoked it. Mishum diyadia kamaisa legabi shelo yochol lahafer achar mikan yom shamo mikri v'kvar avar. So he can't do it on the day that he heard about it because he doesn't know that it's a vow, and he can't do it on the day that he learns that in fact that was a vow because it's not the day that he heard about it. Whereas the Chachamim omrim yafer, the Chachamim say no, you can. B'yom zeh svira lahu. So according to the first opinion, the first view on the thing, that the when is it that you can revoke it? He has the power to revoke it on the day that he heard about it in the first place, even though at that moment he didn't even know that it was a kind of vow that could be revoked. If in fact he said the right words, so then it would be revoked. To spirulahu to mixus yediyah kekol yediyah, that even a partial knowledge is a full knowledge of al kol sha'avar yomo. But once that first day about hearing about it has passed, shuv eino mafer, he would no longer be able to revoke it, even on the day that he hears that in fact the vow was of the kind that he could revoke at some later point. That's too late because he already knew about the vow. The Yom Kama Yom Shamo, because that first day was the day that he heard about it. Mikri, that's what it's called. The Inyan Sheyachol Lahafer, because that's the day that he can do the revocation on it. Ula Inyan She'enu Yachol Lahafer Mikanu Lahaba. And when we say that you can't revoke it, it's talking about from that point on. So that's one way to understand the machlokas. But I actually think that the second way makes a lot more sense. The ikamanda amar, but there's another way to understand this whole machlokas. The ki amar Rebbe Meir, that when Rebbe Meir says lo yafer dafka b'yom shelo achrov kamar, he's talking about on the day that the person learns that in fact this was the kind of vow that he could revoke. So let's say somebody only knows that he can revoke vows between himself and his wife, but he didn't realize that he also has the ability to revoke vows that are inui nefesh, that are self-afflicting for the wife. And so as a result, now he's told, oh, in fact, you can revoke those vows. And he's like, oh my gosh, 3 weeks ago, I heard that she made that vow. I would like to revoke it. So Rebbe Meir says that's not going to work. But if in fact he would have revoked it 3 weeks ago when he didn't realize that it was possible, if he said, I want to revoke it, unfortunately, there's nothing I could do about it because it's not the possibility of revoking. But in fact, he does have that ability. So as a result, if he had used the right language, it would be revoked. This kind of knowledge, meaning just knowing that he has the theoretical ability to revoke, even though he didn't realize that it applied in this case, if in fact he would say the right words, it would be a sufficient revocation to spirale, because the Rebbe Meir would say the kavan shehu yodeya sheyesh nedarim, because he knows about nedarim, the yesh mefirim, and he knows about hafara, he knows about revocation. Yediya gemura mekri, that is a sufficient knowledge. Even though he didn't realize that the particular thing that he was in the process of revoking was in fact a neder. The Chachamim is saying no. Yafer b'yom shel akrav. You can even revoke on the day when you hear that and you learn that in fact vows of self-affliction are vows that can be revoked. Desvira lahu, dekaven de biyoma kama lo havayada. Since at that moment when he learned about the vow in the first place, he didn't realize shazen neder, that would be considered a neder. Lo mikri yadiyah. That isn't considered the day of knowledge. Rather, the day of knowledge is the day that he knows both the fact that he can do hafara and the fact that he has knowledge of the particular vow. So stay tuned tomorrow as the Gemara is going to identify an apparent contradiction between our Mishnah and a Brisa, and then it will attempt to, God willing, resolve it. So Shabbat Shalom, have a wonderful day, and look forward to continuing our learning together.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yashar Chag.
Kotia.